Hello, hello, hello. Welcome back to High on History. I'm Jordan.
And I'm Liz, and today we are going to be talking about the first people to tame the Nile Valley.
Ooh, I'm so excited that we are finally taming the Nile.
Yes.
The Proto-Nubians.
Yep. So, so let's talk a little bit about the geography. We're going to be covering the Nubian Complex people, and they're going to be. Oh, that's the third, not the first.
Oops.
So they are primarily in northern Sudan and southern Egypt along the Nile River, and I want to say at the first cataract of the Nile. And
hang on, you're gonna have to explain what's a cataract. Not everyone's gonna know what a cataract is.
Yeah, I actually had to look this up this week myself, so I was like, what?
I
thought a cataract was an eye thing, right? So...
that's what I know it to be.
Okay, so the cataracts of the Nile, there's 6 of them.
Okay.
And they seem to be numbered north to south, so it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And what it is a place where there's rocks and shallows and like rapids.
Okay.
And it seems that very, very early man settled along these cataracts on the Nile specifically, because they could more easily pool fish into they could use that particular feature, these rapids, to help them with fishing and possibly even crossing the river. So the Nubian Complex people, they inhabited this area, which is Upper Egypt. Remember, Upper Egypt is in the south, Lower Egypt is in the north. So if I'm talking about Upper Egypt, I'm talking about southern Egypt. And then also this is northern, what is currently Sudan.
Yeah.
Right? They were 40,000 to 22,000 years ago. They were, unlike some of the other peoples that we've talked about, but like the Ashango people, they were semi-nomadic. So these people were also in the very early stages of semi-permanent settlements, where they would seasonally stay here and then seasonally stay here, in a different season, and then they might even return to some of those spots, depending on the time of year. So semi-permanent settlements.
Okay, that makes sense.
Let's see. They're characterized by their tools.
Yeah.
So they are using the large bifacial points.
Okay.
Okay. And they're specifically for hunting big game.
Okay.
One of the things that made their tools new and unique in their time was that they began making them beyond the purely pragmatic. They started tooling their tools for aesthetic or possibly ritual purposes. So they start making their tools more artistically. Now, I couldn't find rock art painting stuff for the Nubian Complex people, but they were definitely starting to make their tools aesthetically.
So what I was finding when I did a little bit of my research for my last episode, it was also for clan or tribal definition. I belong to these people.
They definitely think that's a possibility. What I couldn't find, and you're absolutely right, that is widely considered one of the possible purposes. I couldn't find any specific evidence of that here for these people.
Okay.
But I found speculation of it also.
Yeah.
Either way, it is evidence of symbolic and artistic thinking.
Definitely decorative.
Definitely decorative. And decorative on purpose, as opposed to, being just a purely pragmatic tool.
Yeah.
We don't know much of anything. I wanted to find out, okay, do we have chieftains? Do we have priests? What's the social structure?
Right.
What is the role of women? And I could find nada. But there was evidence that although they were not domesticating animals, they may have been occasionally using enclosures, and they may have figured out how to fatten up herds for the hunt.
Huh.
So they're not in the domestication phase yet, and there was no evidence really that they were doing anything other than wild grain harvesting. That'll come up later in the episode.
Yeah.
But they were fattening up herds for the hunt.
Oh.
And so that's an interesting advancement there.
Oh, next week I talk about how they corral animals in about the 20,000 year range. So I wonder if that has anything to do with fattening up wild herds.
That is the second step. That seems to have been they start by fattening up the herds, and then for some of the smaller game, they start figuring out how to use little enclosures. I don't think they were very permanent.
Yeah.
Possibly the enclosures more to encourage mating. It might have been more
for animal husbandry. Yeah.
But again, everything I found was very clear to say that was kind of speculative. Nobody wanted to go too far, and I get that because the actual archaeological record gets pretty thin. These things don't of themselves tend to be made of stone or metal or anything that lasts the test of time. So.
Yeah, like we're also talking 20,000 years ago.
Yeah,
that's
a long time.
That's lost knowledge in general.
And then I was really confused because it also kept bringing up the Khormusan people, and it was bringing them up for around the same time, and I kind of thought the same region.
Okay.
But there was a regional difference, and there are some distinctive differences between the Nubian Complex people and the Khormusan people. So the Khormusan people, they are further down on they are further south. Oh, that one doesn't actually say it correctly. They are further south on the Nile River near the second cataract.
Oh.
And their tools are significantly different. Their tools are fishing tools and were microlithic, as opposed to the large bifacial points of the Nubian Complex people, which were clearly for hunting big game.
Oh.
You get into the bone tools with the Khormusan people. You get back into the microlithic points. And they were they had the stems for hafting on their points also.
Okay.
So that's a specific advancement for them. My notes are not in any great order.
This information was found again kind of last minute.
No, it wasn't found last minute. It was organized last minute, as in not organized.
Oh.
It took me 2 weeks to come up with all of this, but then they were all in separate files.
Oh.
Because every time I went to work on it, for some reason I opened a new text document. So there's 12 text documents here.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah. And some of it is repeat of information. That's the part where I kept going over my notes and then recycling things I'd already gone over. That was, because I kept trying to catch up to where I was.
Right.
It's the wrong sheet of paper. I had the whole Khormusan culture set aside. Okay. Here we are. Khormusan. So the Khormusan are known for their diverse and specialized tool industries, the way they used bone, hematite, and grinding stones.
Oh.
They were doing some plant processing. They're
Okay.
okay, and so were the Nubian Complex Peoples. They did some plant processing
Yeah.
too, but it does seem like the Khormusan people were refining that process a little bit more. Um, and I forgot, I was actually getting to the geography, the specific geography for them. This one, it was a compare and contrast between the Khormusan and the Qadan people, who are going to come up next. And they are very cool. The Qadan people is when things get really cool. But right now what we're showing actually is the path of pastoralism.
Okay.
So how we got there, right?
Okay.
The the Khormusan people were also doing the herd fattening stuff,
Okay.
and they they weren't yet doing anything with grains, but it definitely seems like, and because their tools were for smaller game, they also seem to have advanced that, like they may have had, pens of guinea hens and things of that nature.
Yeah.
So they were also doing the fattening of
So,
wild animals.
Were their tools kind of like the harpoons of the episodes we talked I don't remember which episode we talked about.
Oh, that was a Shango, where they had the harpoons.
Yeah.
I didn't find any harpoons here. It did say bone tools and fishing. I forgot to look for harpoons, and I really should have specifically. I was going to, it crossed my mind.
Oh.
But you know how it is when you get down a rabbit hole?
Oh.
And I didn't quite get there.
Yeah.
I was looking specifically for where exactly on the Nile they were. And one of these is a compare and contrast specifically between the Khormusan and the Nubian Complex people, but this this set seems to be the difference between the Khormusan and the Qadan people.
Oh.
This is why I said some of my notes
are
are just not very particularly well organized.
Oh. I mean, I've done it many a time for an episode.
Right,
completely unorganized.
Oh, no, see, that was bad scripting.
Uh-huh.
It really should be here. No, see, that's just explaining cataracts.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. Oh, I was able to confirm it is accurate to say that the Nubian Complex people were the first culture in the Nile Valley.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, and then they're followed or overlapped with the Khormusan people.
Okay.
And then I wondered, because they were so close, both geographically.
Yeah.
And in the time period. Again, we're looking at the 40,000 to 22,000 years ago. So right away I'm thinking, well, are these the same people?
Yeah.
And why do we call them different things? Like, why are we separating them? So it's by the tools that we're separating them. The large bifacial points
makes sense.
in the north, which was getting more arid faster. So, like, the desertification of the Sahara is beginning to happen in this time.
Yeah.
Okay, and that's moving people around. It's also going to create conflict. It's part of why these semi-nomadic settlements form in the first place.
Right.
Because the actual range of the available usable land starts to shrink.
Oh, yeah, no, of course.
Right.
We've got the African human period, we've got the Ice Age going on, there's all sorts of stuff.
Right, and this is the end of the African human period. So this is as the Sahara is turning into a desert. And so people are starting to crowd to the Nile and other waterways.
Yo.
The Khormusan people were using those microlithic tools and the bone fishing tools.
Yeah.
And I said, well, why do we think that it's two different people and not just one people making a different specialization of tool depending on where they happened to be?
Yeah.
Since they're both semi-nomadic, and the answer was, well, that's a good question. One of the reasons from the archaeological, and I bring this up because I know you're following the genetic path, right? So I thought maybe we could look into the genetics here and see how related or not related these two cultures might have been. In the tool record, they're treated as separately, in part because we've never found the same tools, like we've never found both types of tools at the same site.
Okay, so it's only one set of tools at that site.
Yeah, there's been no overlap, so no particular reason to think. And also, of course, the Nubian Complex people were situated along the Nile also. So ostensibly, if they were sharing a culture with the Khormusan people, they would have had their same bone fishing tools, and there wasn't evidence of that. So,
I mean,
culturally, they don't seem related. Now, I am curious as to...
Genetically speaking, I don't see why they wouldn't be. I have not tapped into that part of the country.
Right.
Or the continent. Yeah.
And it was very much the same lack of a story in terms of the role of women in the culture or any specific cultural... I mean, we're still in this period before written record.
Right.
So we don't know anything about their social structure, their warriors, their priests, their kings, anything like that.
Yeah.
Whether they had them, how egalitarian or not egalitarian they may have been.
Yeah.
But we do know that they were a people who were also experimenting with early herding. So that's kind of fun and interesting. As in, they may have been trying to do more to control the wild herds. They didn't. There's nothing that can really be called domestication at this level. It's just really our first early experiments in,
like, trying to herd a specific animal into a certain spot to kill it, kind of thing, is how I'm picturing it.
I think more like trying to make trying to be in areas where the herds are likely to be, and then doing things to keep them fat and happy so they don't move on super fast.
Yeah.
Maybe. I didn't get a lot of specifics on that. The more specific you want to get, the more difficult the information becomes.
Of course.
To access. But I guess that does kind of take us into the Qadan people, because that is where the story kind of does this wonderful sort of little takeoff, and I am sad to report it doesn't have a long-term happy ending. But even before the Natufians come the Qadan. And the Qadan wind up with some very neat practices. So, they also have a pretty full toolkit. Let me look here in terms of the tools here. Let's see so they're using the level law tool technology, which the Khormusan people also were, but the Nubian Complex people were not.
Okay.
Well, I was looking for the tool stuff, but I did see... This is all just fun stuff. Emergence of pastoralism. The Qadan are thought to be the first in the Nile Valley to have developed early pastoralism, including the domestication of cattle and other animals. Now, here we do begin to see religion, well, maybe not religion per se, but evidence of a spiritual belief system. Cattle was crazy important to these people.
Yeah.
They painted it on everything. They
I end up in my next episode talking about a cattle cult. So.
And that might cattle become all important.
It really does.
As people begin to experiment with pastoralism.
Mm-hmm.
There's a major leap in subsistence strategies and representing one of the first signs of herding and a semi-sedentary living. So these people are less nomadic. They're really starting to settle.
Yeah.
That is going to bite them in the booty in a couple of thousand years.
Yeah.
But in the first place, it seemed like a pretty good idea. What is, to me, the most wonderful, fascinating part about the Qadan is that they are as close to the first farmers as we're going to find.
Oh, yeah.
So, they're not farming.
Yeah.
If we define farming as planting seeds, they're not doing that.
Yeah. Okay.
But they did figure out when they were harvesting grains, when they were harvesting wild millet, wild sorghum, things of that nature.
Yeah.
They would take the seeds and they would rescatter them in the area where those plants grew naturally.
Okay, that makes sense.
So they weren't putting them in the ground, but they would shake them, they would scatter those seeds, and there's even evidence that they may have known to look for the best seeds to scatter versus the best seeds to eat.
Oh, so super early bioengineering.
I mean, I wouldn't go that far. I would not go that far. But we found charred seeds in their food. So we know that they were cooking and eating some of those seeds, and they definitely had a preference for the biggest ones.
Yeah.
Right? So they may have known to take all the littler ones and let it go with the chaff, and then throw that back out and into wherever this stuff was growing, right?
Right.
And then take the most nourishing stuff for themselves. And they also were practicing selective harvesting.
Oh, yeah.
So they only took parts they wouldn't harvest it to pieces, right? They only took bits. They took the choicest parts. They were starting to get fairly picky and fairly refined with how they were handling these wild grains.
Oh, wow.
This isn't domestication of wild grains yet, but it is the very, very first step.
Oh, wow.
And I found that super fascinating.
That is really fascinating, actually.
Yeah. And then the story gets a little dark, I mentioned that they were more and more semi-nomadic and sort of semi-sedentary. They're moving kind of between probably ritualistically, or not ritualistically, but there would have been specific environmental reasons to have one settlement here and one settlement here.
Of course.
You're going to move with the herds, and you're going to start setting stuff up to be prepared for the next time you get there. As you realize that the herd takes the same, well, we might as well build stuff this whole route, right?
Yeah.
So if they're doing that on any level, this wound up creating a tactical problem for them.
Yeah.
And it is sad because our very first experiments in semi-permanent settlements end in disaster.
Yeah.
The disasters appear to have been many, but one of them, and maybe the most notable one, is that the creation of semi-permanent settlements is also the beginning of what would someday become war.
Yeah.
So it's not fair to call it war yet in this time.
You are right. I covered that in Jebel Shahaba. Jebel Shahaba?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which came up in my research too, Jebel Shahaba specifically. Now,
Yeah.
and the reason it did is because initially it was thought to be the site of a battle with the Qadan specifically.
Yeah.
Further evidence, even the archaeologist who first believed and postulated that went back and was like, no.
Yes,
So when I was studying the Qadan, it came up because that misinformation is still very, like if you go and look it up, plenty of sites will confirm, oh yes, it totally was, but no, it wasn't. But it is that creation of those semi-permanent settlements that started making people targets for each other. And as the desert got wider and wider and people are getting pushed now into each other, now there's more competition for resources.
Tribes are getting divided because one half of the family goes one way, the other half of the family decides to go the other way.
Yep. And so violence, really terrible violence ensues, and in that violence we actually get our what little we can surmise. So men and women carried battle wounds. We found that in the scars. And that suggests that they were both seen as equal combatants. They were probably treated as equal combatants. The other thing we can surmise, possibly going even back, I want to be very, very careful about how speculative this is.
Right.
But African culture in general has been historically pretty egalitarian where women are concerned. There were maybe not no battles, but whereas in England the whole notion of having a woman as a queen would send entire nations into
frenzy,
pearl clutching, apoplectic shock. That has not ever historically been the case in Africa. Women have
wonderful
African queens.
I can't wait to cover.
And it appears that just the sexism you tend to get in other places in the world, even early on, even super early on, just is not as prevalent. I'm not going to say it doesn't exist, but it's not nearly as prevalent in African culture. And so women, and it may be one of the reasons that we're not finding such distinctive gender role differences. If everybody's doing the same stuff, then those differences are maybe not going to show up as clearly through the tool record. Now they're going to show up in other ways, but it won't show up through the tool record.
If I was a woman 20,000 years ago and I needed to nap myself a goddamn blade because the boys are out hunting,
well, then you do that, absolutely.
Yeah.
In fact,
everybody knew how to do what they needed to do to survive at that point.
Absolutely. And we remember we covered all the way back in when we were talking about early archaic men that children were doing it. So like a skill as easily as you and I pick up a pencil to write our names.
Right.
They were
napping
tools. Right, exactly so. So there doesn't, I wasn't able to find a lot on women in general for this region, but we can surmise that they took a fairly equal role in their society.
Yeah.
Yeah. That is a lot of what I got. There were some other I wound up spending a lot of time asking questions. Well, what's the difference between, this and this? And it's a story of advancement, but it's not a story of continuous advancement.
Oh.
So I couldn't find any evidence, in spite of the fact that all three of these cultures almost coexist. So the Qadan people, they come after the Khormusan and the Nubian Complex people. But the Nubian Complex people and the Khormusan people, there's some overlap there.
Yeah.
And really the Qadan lived pretty much right where the Khormusan lived, but later.
Yeah.
Right? So I looked, is there evidence that these people were all related to each other?
Yeah.
I had initially thought, well, this must be a branch of the Arturian people. And again, because the Arturian people are up there in northern Egypt, or technically lower Egypt.
Yeah.
Right? And so I thought, well, if they're up there, then they're related to these Nubian people here. I'm thinking now, no. I think, so what we used to call Ethiopia was this huge, large region of land, and it includes Ethiopia, Kenya, I think parts of Tanzania and parts of Sudan.
Probably.
But the Arturian people and the Ethiopian people, as I understand it, are different genetic lines. And so these people are from that Ethiopian line. I am not 100% sure on that. I figured I would leave that question to be answered by our resident expert in tracing awesome genetic questions.
Oh.
Yeah.
That's interesting. I'm gonna have to look into it, so I guess that means we're gonna stick around in Africa?
Yeah, so, rock on. I know we've been telling you guys for weeks now, oh yeah, we're getting ready to leave Africa. We're super excited to explore Paleolithic everywhere else. And then we got to talking about it tonight, and we realized that because our lines of inquiry have been so vastly different, and we covered different regions, it's just time to swap. I'll start talking about cultural stuff happening in North and West Africa, and then down into the West Central Africa. And you are going to cover the genetic lines of the Khoisan, the Khoikhoi, and the East people. So maybe we can get some answers to these questions, like how related or not related are these people really?
Well, I know that there is at least some genetic linkage between the haplogroup H1B1B that I covered in my last episode, because that was found at Jebel Shahaba.
And that's the origin of the Ibero-Mauritian people, correct? Right. And I believe I read somewhere, I can't remember now, but I think the Qadan might be related to the Ibero-Mauritian people, maybe. I forgot.
Okay.
I forgot. Okay. I don't remember right.
I don't remember if the Qadan have the H1B1 link.
I don't either.
And there would also be a few other linkage that would be the markers, the indicating markers. So.
It turns out we're not leaving Africa right away. And this is good. We never wanted to short the African continent. It's full due in the archaeological record, because normally when people talk about ancient history, they do that. We really short Africa. So we're gonna switch regions. We're gonna cover some of the same stuff, but now from different perspectives.
Yeah, I'm gonna cover the genetics and some of the cool things that I find while I'm looking through the genetics. I'm gonna pass off a lot of the stuff that I skipped. Because while I was doing my genetic research in the North and West, I found a lot of stuff that I wanted to cover that I just said fuck it to. Sorry, pardon my language. Every episode I say that.
Please don't, my daughter watches this show.
I can't help it. My 5-year-old nephew watches this. Anyway. Anyways, so now, high on history. I forgot what I was saying. Nikes.
Oh, you were talking about passing off information that
I'll pass off all the information to you.
And we had places too where we kind of had to short ourselves a little bit in the interest of time and in the interest of just like needing to focus. So this also gives us a chance to go back and include some things that maybe we skipped for any number of reasons. Sometimes we run across cool stuff and we're like, oh, that's badass. It's just not the focus of the episode I'm working on right now. So.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So thank you all so much for joining us and learning about the first people to start herding and doing something that will later become farming in the not too distant record. We're gonna get back there with the Natufians, I believe. Yeah.
Yeah, and then I'm also, well, I'm not quite moving up to the Natufians because they're in the Levant, but I will be talking about the bulbous rock period. I'll be talking about the round-headed rock art period.
Oh, I am so interested
I'm
in
getting into the rock art.
Yeah.
In my next episode, which will be next Friday,
Yeah.
we will be discussing the amazing evolution all the way down to the pastoral cave art. So, yeah.
I'm gonna also keep looking for, we found it in the Mali pottery. I found it here with the Qadan and their cattle cult. So I'm really interested in looking at the beginnings of spirituality. So
yeah.
as I move back into North and West Africa, I'm gonna see what I can find there.
The rock art, I'm gonna talk about a mushroom god, possibly, and a horned goddess.
Oh, nice.
At least that's what they're calling them. There's speculation, obviously, and we'll get into all of that next week.
Sure. All right, well, thank you once again for joining us here for High on History. It is always our pleasure to join you on Friday nights to jump down rabbit holes and talk about cool stuff that, history geeks like us love.
Right?
So, thanks so much for being here. Live long and prosper.
Bye.